Okay, so major depressive disorder. This is a nightmare. It's a 2-week time period, so it's different than GAD, which is a 6-month time period. So that's good to keep in mind. And for this one, you need 5 of 9, but of the core 2 symptoms, you need 1 of those. So it's a little more complicated, and there's about 1 billion specifiers. So when you're coding it, you'll specify the course and the severity, and there's different codes for all those. And so the severity is mild, moderate, or severe, and then the course is either a single episode or a recurrent episode. And then you can also specify with psychotic features, in partial remission, in full remission, and unspecified. And then they have an additional list of specifiers that comes third. So when you're coding it, when you write it down, it's major depressive disorder, single or recurrent episode, the severity, psychotic or remission specifiers, and then this list: anxious distress, with mixed features, with melancholic features, with atypical features, with mood congruent psychotic features, with mood incongruent psychotic features, with catatonia, and there's like a coding note for that, with peripartum onset, so pregnancy, and with seasonal pattern. And that applies to the pattern of recurrent major depressive episodes. Okay, so I'm going to go through the criteria, and then just remembering that there's 3 facets to the code after you say MDD. So the main number, it's in the F30s. So it's either F32 or F33, depending on if it's a single episode or a recurrent episode. And then there's decimal points after that for all the different specifiers, severity, and so forth. So anyway, it's either F32 for a single episode of major depression, or F33 if it's a recurrent episode of major depression. Well, actually, yeah. All right, major depressive disorder, diagnostic criteria. There's A, B, C, D, E, and then all of the add-ons. The criteria A through C represent a major depressive episode, and so you need 5 of 9 symptoms present during the same 2-week period, representing a change from previous functioning, and that's to meet criteria A. At least one of the symptoms in the list have to be number 1, depressed mood, or number 2, loss of interest or pleasure. So those are considered the core symptoms: depressed mood, loss of interest or pleasure, and those are also the first 2 in the list of 9, and you need to have one of those 2. You don't need to have both. Okay, so here goes. 1, depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day, as indicated by either subjective report, for example, feeling sad, feeling empty, hopeless, or observation made by others, for example, crying a lot, appears tearful. In children and adolescents, this can be also an irritable mood. So the depressed mood most of the day, if you're a kid or an adolescent, can be an irritable mood most of the day, and that meets the core criteria, but it doesn't if you're an adult. 2, markedly diminished interest or pleasure in all or almost all activities most of the day, nearly every day, as indicated by either subjective account or observation. So again, you can report it either way. Either the person says it or somebody that's watching them, or you can see it. 3, significant weight loss when not dieting or weight gain, for example, a change of more than 5% of body weight in a month, or a decrease or increase in appetite nearly every day. In children, consider failure to make expected weight gain. 4. Insomnia or hypersomnia nearly every day. 5. Psychomotor agitation or retardation nearly every day, observable by others, not merely subjective feelings of restlessness or being slowed down. 6. Fatigue or loss of energy nearly every day. 7. Feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt, which may be delusional, nearly every day, not merely self-reproach or guilt about being sick. 8. Diminished ability to think or concentrate or indecisiveness nearly every day, either by subjective account or as observed by others. And 9. Recurrent thoughts of death, not just a fear of dying, recurrent suicidal ideation without a specific plan, or a suicide attempt, or a specific plan for committing suicide. And there's a note about this. It doesn't have to be nearly every day. It can be an attempt or a plan one time, and that counts for the 9th of the list of criteria. Okay, B. This is the easy one to remember. The symptoms cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. And C. The episode is not attributable to a physiological effect of a substance or another medical condition. And so criteria A through C represent a major depressive episode. Now, for it to be major depressive disorder, you also have to have D and E, which are listed below. There's also a very long note in the middle of this that says responses to a significant loss, for example, bereavement, financial ruin, losses from a natural disaster, a serious medical illness or disability, may include feelings of intense sadness, rumination about the loss, insomnia, poor appetite, and weight loss, noted in criteria A, which may resemble a depressive episode. Although such symptoms may be understandable or considered appropriate to the loss, the presence of a major depressive episode, in addition to the normal response to a significant loss, should also be carefully considered. This decision inevitably requires the exercise of clinical judgment based on the individual's history and the cultural norms for the expression of distress in the context of loss. So that's the note that I'm not going to ever read again on this. So the other two criteria that make the major depressive episode in criteria A through C into a major depressive disorder are D and E. D is at least one major depressive episode is not better explained by schizoaffective disorder and is not superimposed on schizophrenia, schizophreniform disorder, delusional disorder, or other specified or unspecified schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorders. And then E, there has never been a manic episode or a hypomanic episode. And that's because, they're ruling out bipolar. It would be bipolar instead of this if there was the other criteria met. And it says, note, this exclusion does not apply if all of the manic-like or hypomanic-like episodes are substance-induced or are attributable to the physiological effects of another medical condition. So, if you have mania because of drugs or medication, then you can still be considered to have a major depressive disorder. But if the mania is not just attributable to that, then you need to look at bipolar criteria. All right, here's the specifiers. So the first thing that you code is mild, moderate, or severe. And the second thing that you code is whether it's a single episode, the first one, or a recurrent episode. For an episode to be considered recurrent, there must be an interval of at least 2 consecutive months between separate episodes in which criteria are not met for a major depressive episode. Okay. And then if psychotic features are present, you'll code it with psychotic features, and that doesn't matter how severe it is. And then if it's in partial remission or in full remission, that would be coded. And then if it's unspecified, it gets a 0.9 code after either F32 for single episode or F33 for recurrent. When you record the name of the diagnosis, terms should be listed in the following order: major depressive disorder, single or recurrent episode, severity, psychotic or remission specifier, and then the following specifiers. And I'm going to read this list because it's really long. So, you also have a severity for with anxious distress, which is one of the third specifiers, so that's complicated, but here goes. You specify if with anxious distress, defined as the presence of at least two of the following symptoms during the majority of days of the current major depressive episode, or the most recent major depressive episode if major depressive disorder is currently in partial or full remission, or for current persistent depressive disorder. And so these are for all the depressive disorders. And those are 5 of the criteria for different types of anxiety disorders. So feeling keyed up or tense, feeling unusually restless, difficulty concentrating because of worry, fear that something awful may happen, or a feeling the individual might lose control of him or herself. And then you specify the severity as mild for 2 of those symptoms, moderate for 3, moderate to severe for 4 or 5 symptoms, and severe for 4 or 5 symptoms, but with motor agitation. Surely we would be able to look this up. The note is that anxious distress has been noted as a prominent feature of both bipolar and major depressive disorder in both primary care and specialty mental health settings. High levels of anxiety have been associated with higher suicide risk, longer duration of illness, and a greater likelihood of treatment non-response. As a result, it's clinically useful to specify accurately the presence and severity levels of anxious distress for treatment planning and monitoring of response to treatment. Okay, so the specifiers for depressive disorders are with anxious distress, mild, moderate, moderate severe, or severe, adds the motor agitation, or the other ones are with mixed features, which is at least 3 of the following manic or hypomanic symptoms present during the majority of days. So it's a symptom of mania or hypomania, but it's not a full manic episode or hypermanic episode. And you specify even if it's in partial or full remission. And that's elevated or expansive mood. There's 7 of them. Inflated self-esteem or grandiosity. More talkative than usual or pressure to keep talking. Flight of ideas or subjective experience that thoughts are racing. Increase in energy or goal-directed activity, either socially, at work, or at school, or sexually. Increased or excessive involvement in activities that have a high potential for painful consequences, such as engaging in unrestrained buying sprees, sexual indiscretions, or foolish business investments. Or 7, decreased need for sleep, feeling rested despite sleeping less than usual, to be contrasted with insomnia. So that's A for mixed features. And remember, you need at least 3 of those present. B, mixed symptoms are observable by others and represent a change from the person's usual behavior. C, for individuals whose symptoms meet full criteria for mania or hypomania, diagnosis should either be bipolar 1 or bipolar 2, respectively. And D, the mixed symptoms are not attributable to a substance. And it just says to a substance. So it does not add a medical disorder to that one. So that's good to know. So mixed features is ruled out if it's attributable to a substance. Mixed features associated with a major depressive episode have found to be a significant risk factor for the development of bipolar 1 or bipolar 2, and so it's important to note this stuff. Okay, the third specifier, with melancholic features. There's A and B to this, and the specifier with melancholic features is applied if these features are present at the most severe stage of the episode. There is a near complete absence of the capacity for pleasure, not merely diminishment, And a guideline for evaluating the lack of reactivity to mood is that even highly desired events are not associated with marked brightening of mood. Either the mood doesn't brighten at all or it brightens only partially. And they say up to 20 to 40% of normal for only a few minutes at a time. The distinct quality of the mood that is characteristic of with melancholic features specifiers is experienced as a qualitatively different thing from that during a non-melancholic depressive episode. A depressed mood that is described as merely more severe, longer lasting, or present without a reason is not considered distinct in quality. Psychomotor changes are nearly always present and are observable by others. So with melancholic features, you're going to see that lethargy or the agitation. Melancholic features exhibit only a modest tendency to repeat across episodes in the same individual. They are more frequent in inpatient folks as opposed to outpatients, are less likely to occur in milder than in more severe major depressive episodes, and are more likely to occur in individuals with psychotic features. And so the criteria for the specifier with melancholic features is A, one of the following is present during the most severe period of the current episode or the most recent, if it's in partial or full remission. 1, loss of pleasure in all or almost all activities. And 2, lack of reactivity to usually pleasurable stimuli. You don't feel much better, even temporarily, when something good happens. And then you also need to have B, which is 3 or more of the following 6. So A is 1 of 2, and B is 3 of 6. 3 or more of the following: 1, a distinct quality of depressed mood characterized by profound despondency, despair, and or moroseness, or by so-called empty mood. 2, depression that is regularly worse in the morning. 3, early morning awakening, at least 2 hours before you usually wake up. 4, marked psychomotor agitation or retardation, so you're either super fidgety or super lethargic looking. 5, significant anorexia or weight gain. And 6, excessive or inappropriate guilt. And so you need at least 3 of those. All right, the next specifier is with atypical features. There's a really not a long note about the fact that atypical depression is called that because it's atypical distinctively to the more classical agitated presentation of depression that was the norm when depression was rare in an outpatient. So this is some historical thing, right? So that's their note. And then they talk about mood reactivity a little bit. Mood reactivity is the capacity to be cheered up when presented with positive events. And they give a bunch of examples, like a visit from your kids or compliments. Mood can become euthymic, which is not sad, even for extended periods of time if the external circumstances remain favorable. Increased appetite can be manifested by an obvious increase in food intake or by the weight gain. Hypersomnia may include either an extended period of nighttime sleep or daytime napping that totals at least 10 hours of sleep per day, or at least 2 hours more than when they're not depressed. Leaden paralysis is defined as feeling heavy, leaden, or weighted down, but often lasts for many hours at a time. It's usually in the arms and legs, and it's usually present for about an hour a day. Unlike other atypical features, pathological sensitivity to perceived interpersonal rejection is a trait that has an early onset and persists throughout most of one's adult life. Rejection sensitivity occurs when the person is or is not depressed, though it may be exacerbated during depressive periods. Okay, so the specifier with atypical features is applied when these features predominate during the majority of the days of the current major depressive episode, or the most recent if it's in remission. And it's characterized by A, mood reactivity. Your mood brightens in response to actual or potential positive events. And B, 2 of the following 4: significant weight gain or increase in appetite, hypersomnia, leaden paralysis, or a long-standing pattern of interpersonal rejection sensitivity that results in significant social or occupational impairment. And then C, criteria are not met for with melancholic features or with catatonia during the same episode. So it's either atypical or with melancholic features, not both. Or with catatonia, not both. All right. With psychotic features, delusions or hallucinations are present at any time in the current major depressive episode or for the most recent. And these psychotic features have two different aspects. They're either mood congruent, which means the content of the delusions and hallucinations consistent with the typical depressive themes of inadequacy, guilt, disease, death, nihilism, or deserved punishment, or the psychotic features are not mood congruent, which means they're mood incongruent psychotic features. They're not in line with those things. The content could be a mixture of incongruent and congruent themes with depression, in which case you'd still go with mood incongruent. If the specifier is with catatonia, it's applied to the current depressive episode, or for the most recent one, if the catatonic features are present during most of the episode. And then you need to see the criteria for catatonia that's elsewhere in the schizophrenia spectrum or other psychotic disorders. And then the one for peripartum onset is a full page. I am not going to read all of this, but know that it's applied if the major depressive disorder is currently or in partial and full remission, if the onset of mood symptoms occurs during pregnancy or in the 4 weeks following delivery. And so it says it can happen during pregnancy or postpartum. And then it says about half of postpartum major depressive episodes begin prior to delivery. And thus these episodes are referred to collectively as peripartum episodes. So between conception and birth, there's a lot of stats here. It goes on and on and on and on and on. With seasonal pattern is also a specifier. With seasonal pattern has 4 criteria. And I think, no, 4 criteria. It applies to the recurrent major depressive disorders only. So if it's a single episode, you would not have a seasonal pattern because there's no pattern. A, there's been a regular temporal relationship between the onset of the major depressive episode in major depressive disorder and a particular time of year, for example, fall or winter. So it happens at the same time, temporal. Don't include cases where there's an obvious effect of seasonality-related psychosocial stressors. So if you're unemployed every winter, it doesn't count. B, full remissions also occur at a characteristic time of year. So it comes on, that's A, it comes on at a particular time, and B, it goes away at a particular time, such as the spring. C, in the last 2 years, 2 major depressive episodes have occurred that demonstrate the temporal seasonal relationship defined above, and no non-seasonal major depressive episodes have occurred. So there's an absence of these happening at a non-seasonal time in the last 2 years. And finally, D, seasonal major depressive episodes substantially outnumber the non-seasonal major depressive episodes that could have occurred over the individual's lifetime. So yeah, maybe they were depressed in high school or something, but now at 35, they've gotten depressed every winter and they get better every spring for the last couple of years. It would be with seasonal pattern. And then there's lots of notes under this. And it's just clarifying those other things. And the prevalence of winter type seasonal pattern varies with latitude, age, and sex. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. Specify also if it's in partial remission, which means the symptoms of the immediate previous major depressive episode are present, but full criteria are not met, or there is a period lasting less than 2 months without any significant symptoms following the end of the prior episode. So it's partial remission if it's kind of stopped, or if it's stopped for like a month but not the full 2 months. It's in full remission if at least the past 2 months no significant signs or symptoms of depression were evident. And then you're supposed to also specify severity. Severity is based on the number of criterion symptoms and the severity of those symptoms. So mild is considered few symptoms in excess of those required to make the diagnosis, and the intensity is distressing but manageable. The symptoms result in minor impairment in social or occupational functioning. Moderate means they fall in between the criteria for mild and severe. And then severe is the number of symptoms is substantially in excess of that required to make the diagnosis, and the intensity of the symptoms is seriously distressing and unmanageable, and the symptoms markedly interfere with social and occupational functioning. So moderate falls between those two, so it's at the kinda, right? So it's medium. And that's it. So overall, the major depressive disorder criteria are A, B, and C for the depressive episode, and D and E for the disorder. And then there's a bunch of specifiers. So I'm going to leave all the specifier part out, and I'm just going to hit the major diagnostic criteria one more time to study. It's 5 out of 9 with at least one of the first two happening. And the first two are depressed mood. Oh, wait a minute. Start over. All of the 9 criteria, with the exception of the last one, suicidality, are present for most of the day, nearly every day. So if you remember, the first 8 are most of the day, nearly every day, you're good to go. And then the 9th one, an attempt or a plan for suicidality, just has to happen once. And the time frame is the last 2 weeks, or a 2-week period. So major depressive disorder is 5 of 9 symptoms over the same 2-week period, most of the day, nearly every day, with the exception of suicidality. And you have to have one of the core symptoms, which are the first 2. Depressed mood, by your own report or by observation. Number 2, diminished interest or pleasure in all or almost all activities, also by report or by observation. 3, significant weight loss or weight gain. 4, insomnia or hypersomnia. 5, being lethargic or psychomotor agitation. 6, fatigue or loss of energy. 7, feeling worthless or having excessive guilt or inappropriate guilt. 8, diminished ability to think, concentrate, or indecisiveness. And then 9, recurrent thoughts of death, suicidality, attempts, or plans. B, the symptoms cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. And C, it's not attributable to the effects of a substance or a medical condition. That's major depressive episode. And then D, at least one episode is not better explained by schizoaffective disorder, is not superimposed on schizophrenia, schizophrenia-form disorder, delusional disorder, or the other specified or unspecified schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorders. And E, there has never been a manic or hypomanic episode. So that's the upshot for MDD. So for it to be a depressive disorder, no mania, no hypomania, and at least one of the episodes is not part of schizophrenia, schizophrenia-like stuff, or psychotic stuff. A, B, and C are needed to have a major depressive episode. It's the same for bipolar major depressive episode. And it's not attributable to drugs or medical conditions. It causes the impairment in functioning or the significant distress. And it's 5 of 9 of the criteria, with 1 being those first 2, depressed mood or diminished interest. All the criteria, with the exception of suicidality, occur most of the day, nearly every day. And it says that on every criteria in there. All right, that was long. I'm done.